So now we're officially entering into the next part of the agenda, which is about questions. Throughout the day, we offer you that you will have a chance to experience and explore logosynthesis, to understand what are its benefits or advantages or how it is applied in different areas. But of course, now that we're getting deeper, we're now getting more questions. And to answer these questions, today we have two very special members of our community. One is Mary O'Donoghue from Ireland and Laurie Weiss from the United States. I apologize for the background noise. It's South America. So yes, this is myself, very happy. So let's please now give the floor to Mary O'Donoghue and to Laurie Weiss, who are now here to answer our questions. And oh my goodness, I just changed this, just a moment. And here we go, we're now both ready. So I welcome Mary and Laurie. Please open your mics.
Okay.
And this is the perfect opportunity for everyone. I know you have questions. These ladies, I'm sure, will have plenty of answers and stories and cases. So please go ahead, ask away. This is your chance. So I'm going to now take a look at the chat to see what people are asking. And in the meantime, I'm going to be also sharing some questions that I gathered from the audience early. But before doing so, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure.
Laurie, go ahead, Laurie.
Okay. I'm Laurie Weiss, and I'm in Colorado in the US, which is very far from the sources of logosynthesis. The first time I was introduced to logosynthesis in 2010, I completely dismissed it. It was a fairly academic introduction, and it just didn't make any impression on me at all. But later, many months later, a friend used it when I was upset. And I had a profound response. And it was like, is this what you were talking about? So this was early on in the process. I read some things. They didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I had been a psychotherapist at that point for about 40 years. So one of my passions has always been to see what people could do for themselves. So as soon as I really had an introductory class, which I didn't really understand very well, I started playing with it, and I started running groups and teaching people logosynthesis. And out of that came the first book for the general public that I wrote on logosynthesis. And that was really, really exciting. And the responses to that about people picking up logosynthesis from a book and using it themselves have been so exciting. How about you, Mary?
Well, I was teaching the coaching course actually that Heather referred to at the very beginning. I was teaching that in England, and it happened that it was the anniversary of the Institute, the 25th anniversary of the Institute I was teaching in, the Iron Mill, and Willem became the keynote speaker. And so he introduced a little video that he had done with one of the pupils of the Institute that weekend. And it was the beginning of logosynthesis. I think he was still calling it thought field therapy or something like that at the time. And I remember being so impressed with how quickly the results happened for the man he was working with. And then he asked me if I would go over and do some teaching with him over in Switzerland. And then he told us about his first training course that he was going to do in logosynthesis. So I was already impressed before I started. So myself and my husband went and we did it along with Astrid. And I've loved it ever since. And it's the thing I work with now all the time. And the local doctors keep sending clients, patients to me. And for this wonderful cognitive therapy type of stuff that I do, and I keep telling them it's logosynthesis, and they keep on sending for this wonderful cognitive therapy stuff that I do. So so I go around each one of them and tell them it's not cognitive therapy, it's logosynthesis that I'm doing, and it's so profound and so simple and so beautiful that it's the only way I work now at this stage. So have we got any people who have questions coming up, Alan?
Yes. One of the questions is, when working with young children or resistant children, must they repeat the sentence back? Can you do this work with infants? What do you think?
Yes. You can do it with infants on their behalf. But if you're working with a child who's resistant, I'm going to suggest that you're not at the stage where you should be using sentences yet at all, because the relationship isn't developed enough. And I think it's so important that we really emphasize this. You don't do any work until you have a trusting relationship developed with your client. Only then do you begin to do the work. But so if the child is resistant, it's not ready to do work yet. But if, as far as infants or children who can't yet vocalize, you can say the sentences on their behalf. Laurie?
I would say there are no resistant children, there are only resistant parents.
Well, that's true. Yes, that is true. Yeah.
And
Or protective parents who think that you're going to do some magic on their children and whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, and one thing about children is that when you need to create more safety for the children, you can say the sentence on behalf of the children, and when you want to stimulate autonomy in the child, then you let the child still say the sentence for themselves or as themselves.
Another question we have is, in this case, can you teach the parents?
Oh, yes. That's very easy to do. And it's all you have to do is tell the parents that it can't be harmful, because if it doesn't work, the essence will stop anything from harming the child or from doing anything. So if it doesn't work, that's fine. Just go ahead and try the next thing. In self-coaching, in what I've been teaching, I have found that people can do this in all kinds of situations where there's minimal trust established. I once had an experience on a phone call with a client, a coaching client that I was volunteering with. I didn't even know his name. He had just called in and he sounded very depressed. He'd lost his job. And I said something to him about, I've got something a little bit strange. Would you like to try it? This was in about the first 10 minutes. And we said the sentences, and immediately he started telling me about what he was going to do next. It was one of those startling moments that I've come to expect with logosynthesis, but in the beginning, when I was just starting out, I was so surprised.
I have another question, and now it's about logosynthesis and versus EMDR. The question is, how is neutralization of logosynthesis different from the desensitization of EMDR? Is the result more profound?
I have not used EMDR, I've just used EFT. And I believe in this case, the result is a lot more profound. And go ahead, Mary.
And I am now at the stage where the only thing that I use is logosynthesis, and have done for years. So my experience is that logosynthesis is working, is profound, and therefore I don't use any of the other modalities that I've been taught over the years.
I'm trained in EMDR in the 90s, and I think it's very important to look at the differences. So there are a few differences which are very important. That in logosynthesis you can tune the process to the client all the time. If you work with EMDR, you bring the client into a state in which he has to do the processing by himself all the time. So you dive very deep in the process, and in EMDR, you never know how he gets out. If you use logosynthesis, you have a number of ways to regulate the tempo because you have 3 sentences. If you want to go not too deep, then you cut the working pause. You can use 1 sentence or 2 or 3, and so you have a fine tuning which is not possible in EMDR. A second is you call it desensitization. This is not about desensitization because you don't desensitize, you just resolve the issue. And that goes much deeper than any desensitization can go. So I think I'm very grateful to Francine Shapiro because I learned a lot from her. I was trained by her also. And we have the suds from her. She used the validity of the positive cognition, which we don't use, but it gave me the opportunity to work with the validity of the negative cognition, which you never do with EMDR. There's a very fine, the way Francine Shapiro built up the working alliance was very good. So I learned a lot from that very slow approach to, let's say, activating the issue. So there is a difference, but let's say for me it's much easier to work with logosynthesis than with EMDR. So, but I learned a lot. So it's one of the roots in the logosynthesis system, in the model, in the way of working, building up a working alliance. But when it comes to processing, logosynthesis is much more gentle. Question answered?
Now that we're talking about EMDR, a question about EFT and logosynthesis arises. The question says, has anyone combined the tapping of EFT and logosynthesis? I'm curious how to combine these two.
I don't.
I don't combine them. As soon as I learned logosynthesis, I found it was so much faster and easier and more comfortable to use for the client and for myself that I just dropped using EMD. I just dropped using the EFT.
So did I. I don't think that you need to combine for me, working with logosynthesis, you don't need to combine any of the modalities. Logosynthesis in and of itself is enough. That doesn't mean that you don't use information that you've garnered from other modalities as a foundation under which you build. But once you start using logosynthesis at the profound level, as opposed to just a set of sentences as a tool, you will find that you don't need to use any other modality.
I would agree with that.
I would agree with that too, because let's say I learned EFT before I developed logosynthesis, and I worked with it a lot. I found it a fascinating model. I went to San Francisco to train with Gary Craig, and so I like so I think these are predecessors. They came before. So we built up on EMDR, we built on EFT and energy psychology, and we learned a lot from them. But what's missing for me, what's very important if I look at NLP, at EFT, whatever, the spiritual dimension is missing. And our energy comes from the spiritual dimension. And in that sense, EFT is technique. Logosynthesis is a coherent and complete model. And that's, so let's say there are a few instances when someone is really stressed with a very high degree of arousal, you can tap, because that slows the process down and then makes the client more accessible. But otherwise, it's logosynthesis has come after EFT.
And now that we're talking about the spiritual realm, one of the questions is, what is the process and potential in the self-application of logosynthesis as a spiritual practice?
I would say that it is a profound way to clear away barriers so that one can experience essence. And momentarily, as the barriers dissolve, it's like, oh, I am connected. There is a connection. And I've experienced that many times.
I often use the analogy that it's like coming home to yourself. It's opening, releasing all the doors that are blocking that connection with who you are meant to be in the world, who you are at that essence level, and that you can believe in any of the deities, you can believe in anything like that, but it is that connection that I am connected with me, but as important, I am therefore connected with others and the rest as well. And it is a coming home for me. That's the best way I have to describe it.
I had an interesting
Sure, please go ahead.
I had an interesting discussion with friends who talked about meditation and how much time they spend in meditation. And they asked me, do you meditate? And I said, no, I don't need it. And they were really flabbergasted. Oh, you don't need meditation? I said, I'm there. And and if I'm not there, I have logosynthesis to arrive in the moment. And what's the most important thing about meditation? Arriving in the moment. But the question is, are you arriving in the moment on your own, or are you arriving in the moment with the other people? Just what you said, Mary. It's the connection between yourself and the matrix and the people in the matrix you share your world with. If you withdraw on one side and you meditate, and the next morning you go to work and you forget about your meditation, that's not the way I prefer.
So now that we're talking about, again, spirituality, we're coming back now to the body and trauma. And one of the questions revolves around it. This person says, I'm interested in Tina's statement about how trauma imprints in the brain and subconscious and simultaneously in the body. If there is a particular strong pre-verbal trauma imprint for decades, can complete relief occur with logosynthesis?
I've seen Willem do work that seems to have that effect.
I've seen it happen where it does. It doesn't stop something being part of your history, but it stops something keeping you frozen in that place in history and allows you to be free to move forward from now on. That's how I see it. So that it doesn't stop the car going into the tree or the fact that that happened to you, but it stops the energy that got frozen in that moment. It releases that so that you are free to move on from that moment on into your future unhindered.
And I've seen happen that again and again. And that doesn't mean that there is no trauma left, because what I see happening is that the first time a client comes to me and they talk about something that happened at 16, and then they talk about something that happened at 7, and then they talk about something that happened at 1, and then they talk about birth, and they talk about conception, and they talk about past lives. But in fact, there is no difference in addressing the issues because the trauma is not in the body, the trauma is not in the brain, the trauma is a state of frozen energy which manifests in the body and which manifests in the brain. So I think one of the most important things to to get used to in logosynthesis is to translate everything into energy.
Yes.
So the brain is energy. It's not that energy is the brain. The body is energy. And if you can dive under the patterns that are frozen in the body, in the brain, in the mind, whatever, then you can resolve it.
And Willem, I found the most difficult thing for people, psychotherapists in particular, to get past and to switch to is being able to have that perspective. We're so used to hearing the story, and it isn't about the story. It is about the energy.
Yes.
It's the energy which is frozen in the story or in the mind or in the belief or whatever.
And now that we're exploring frozen energy, I have a question related about that. And it says, with logosynthesis, you have to ask questions to get down to the triggers, correct? For someone who has difficulty communicating, how do you proceed?
I use a model from transactional analysis in many cases, developmentally based transactional analysis. And often the behavior that somebody is exhibiting is about something that happened at a particular age. And so I ask a question that is likely to evoke what happened at that age. I know we all use different models. Sometimes I go right for the body. Where does it hurt? What is going on? And simply deal with that, or deal with a representation of that. So if that were an animal, what would it be? And work with the animal.
And also in the line of exploration, another question arises. Can one use family constellations as an exploratory foundation to build an alliance and then apply logosynthesis for neutralizing any entanglements or any obstacles?
Why would you do that? Let's say, if you think about family constellation, it's very interesting because I spent some time on family constellation, but it was not good for me because I was standing in the space of the client, picking up all the energy of the client. The client felt very well after the session, and I felt miserable because everything was frozen in my system. So what are we doing in logosynthesis? When we use the personal space, but we won't enter anybody into that space. Even as a therapist or a coach, you stay out of the space of the client. That means the client has the possibility to explore their own space without the interference of all the energy of all the people. So if we use logosynthesis in a group, the group creates the safe space for the client without interfering. And then the client can discover their own issue and resolve their own issue, and the group feels very good afterwards. I never felt well after a family constellation session. Maybe I didn't have the biggest professionals in the field, that's possible, but you don't need it because the energy of someone else is not needed in the field of the client because you want to clear that field. And you want to teach the client how to feel their own system. And that's for me the biggest disadvantage of family constellation is all that energy in the field of the client. On the other hand, we have a beautiful metaphor because in fact family constellation discovered the representations of all those people in that field. And we must not ignore that because that's what we learned from family constellation. Of course, Virginia Satir started much earlier with that, but it's derived from that thinking of an energy field which contains information. And it contains frozen information which can be resolved. And the method of family constellation is pretty tedious. You work for 3 hours with one client, and we work in 3 hours with 3 or 4 clients. So it's also a question of efficiency.
Okay, so now I have some questions about philosophy of logosynthesis. And just a moment. Right, so this participant says, when I first learned logosynthesis over a decade ago, we first invited Essence to be with us at the start of the process before doing the sentences. That seems to no longer be part of the process. Why?
I don't remember doing that.
I still clear my own energy before I start working with anybody.
But that's energy, that's not essence.
That's true. But
there's a very simple reason for that. Because we never do it in a seminar. It was in the books in the beginning to create a safe space for the client to work. And let's say when we started or organized training, we didn't need it anymore. So I could leave it because it wasn't necessary anymore. And at the moment we have, let's say, if you look at the Facebook group, and if I just look at what's happening today, we have such a strong field. We don't have to call Essence in because Essence is already there when we start to work. This is nice because this is how we developed this. So when I was on my own, writing books on my own, and getting all the resistance, then I needed that. And when I started to teach, I needed that. But now the field is strong enough, so we can relax.
Okay. So another question. It says, it is my opinion that using logosynthesis, you do not need any more religion or angels or whatever that's outside of you. Do you agree?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
My understanding is that logosynthesis is something that is a gift that has been given to us, and we accept that gift from whatever position we are in the world and connect with Essence at that level. For some people that is with the theology, for others it is not. And so it depends on who you are and where your belief systems are. For me, I still have my theological understandings as well.
Thank you. People are asking if you could share examples of using logosynthesis on cases of physical disease or with clients on the autism spectrum. Can we use logosynthesis in those cases?
Definitely on the physical level, it's been really brought home to me over the last year. A family member has been physically unwell, and he has used logosynthesis, and we got the full group of from the Logosynthesis Facebook to send healing energy. And at the end of 2020, he is clear of his illness at the moment. So, and he has worked with different people within the community, and it has made a huge difference. So yes, without a shadow of a doubt, it works on a physical level, as I can attest to tonight.
Yeah, when I was in the hospital, I was writing one of my books in Lanzarote, and I landed in the hospital with what they called an ischemic colitis. So the medical doctors among you will know what it is. And I was in a very miserable state at the moment, for 3 or 4 days. And then my colleague Andrea asked the group to do logosynthesis on my behalf on Wednesday, and on Thursday morning I was thinking about quitting the hospital. And I quit the hospital on Sunday, and they told me, you cannot quit the hospital. I can quit because I want to quit the hospital. And that was a diagnosis which, so everybody was really thinking I couldn't be flown home. I couldn't I couldn't see visitors, and this just worked. And so one of my favorite programs is Logosynthesis and the Body, in which I work with physical issues all the time. And it's about the translation of a physical issue to energy, and then find the frozen energy in your system, because the disequilibrium is not on the physical level, it's a result of the energetic level. And we have to find that. And that's the kind of, I call myself Inspector Columbo every once in a while, because I don't know if you know Lieutenant Columbo, but his favorite way of working is, I don't understand this. And then he gets information, he gets ever more information, and then he makes his one intervention, and then the criminal is caught. And I like that metaphor. So we're not doing much. We're not showing off how good we are. No, we just do this step-by-step work.
Good. Whew, time has flown by, and we're already at the end of the open questions and answers section. So I'd like to thank you so much, Laurie, Mary, and Willem, for being willing to be here and sharing your experience and knowledge and stories. The community really is looking forward to get to know more and learn, and this is a fantastic opportunity to have you here for this reason.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.